Good evening, welcome. I'm John. I'm the event director at Literati Bookstore in downtown Ann Arbor, Michigan. We're so pleased to welcome Alex McElroy to our At Home with Literati series in support of the Atmospherians. They'll be joined in conversation this evening by author Crystal Hana Kim. Just a quick webinar overview for attendees. The chat is closed, but you may want to keep the chat window open during the event because I will be dropping links to purchase the Atmospherians from Literati throughout. You can also use the Q&A feature that's available to you on your toolbar to submit questions at any time, and I will ask a selection at the conclusion of the conversation. And live transcription is available on your toolbar as well, should you need it. A reminder, you can shop for more books at literatibookstore.com to have shipped to your home anywhere in the United States. And if you live in Southeast Michigan or Ann Arbor, our doors are now open to the public, finally. And in lieu of a book purchase, we'd also ask that you consider a $5 donation to sustain our virtual programming. Whether you'd like to think of that as this week's or this month's or this year's subscription to our programming, you can make donations at literatibookstore.com/donation. Otherwise, we simply thank you for your attendance this evening or this morning or this afternoon, depending on where and when you may be joining us. And now, allow me to introduce tonight's author and our moderator. Alex McElroy is a non-binary writer based in Brooklyn. They received their MFA from Arizona State University and their PhD from the University of Houston. Their writing has been supported by the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, the Tin House Summer Workshop, the Sewanee Writers Conference, and the Elizabeth George Foundation. The Atmospherians is their first novel. And Crystal Hana Kim is the author of If You Leave Me, which was a Booklist Editor's Choice title and named the best book of 2018 by over 10 publications, including the Washington Post. She was a 2021 Jerome Hill Artist finalist and a 2017 PEN America Dow Short Story Prize winner. She teaches at Columbia University and is a contributing editor at Apogee Journal. Please join me in welcoming Alex McElroy and Crystal Hana Kim into your living rooms.
Hey. All right, thank you so much, John. That was wonderful. And thank you, Crystal, for being here. Thank you, Literati, for hosting me this evening. So I'm going to read a couple passages. First, I'm going to read from a section called The Seasons of Hunger, and then I'm going to jump just a really short portion from that section, and then I'm going to jump to the end of the book and read a really brief section that will give you sort of an example of some of the tonal shifts that happen in this book. Okay, so I'll just jump right in. The Seasons of Hunger. Imagine a father. Imagine the father is firm-fleshed and grim, gripping a steering wheel as he drives to work at 2 in the morning. Imagine the father has been called in on a weekend to the pharmaceutical plant where he sweeps floors and changes light bulbs 5 nights a week to fix a steam-leaking pipe, a leak that could wait until Monday. Imagine the father has made this hour-long drive thousands of times. Imagine he is accustomed to working nights, accustomed to being called in, and really shouldn't be any more tired than the normal person. Imagine the father is not tired in the heavy-lidded physical way, but tired in ways that don't have names. Imagine tiredness as a characteristic. Imagine tiredness as an outfit the father cannot unzip. Imagine a father so angry for having to wear this outfit every day of his life. He spends his rare hours at home taking out his anger by lifting weights in a basement. Imagine a father so unaccustomed to love that he considers mocking his son's belly fat an expression of paternal care. Imagine a father incapable of loving his son how he is. Imagine a father who pressures his son to lift weights and eat fewer softening foods, who pulls the boy's plate away at the table and grumbles, "That's enough of that." Imagine this father, still at the wheel, now nearly 3 in the morning. Imagine this father driving to work on a weekend to fix a leak that doesn't need fixing. It's not a dangerous leak. Imagine the highways free of debris, a dry night in the first week of June. And imagine this father, Angry and exhausted, unintentionally loses control of the wheel around a familiar turn. Imagine his truck pummels through a guardrail. Imagine his head webs the windshield on impact, killing him if not instantly, then quickly. Imagine this is an accident. Dyson's body at age 17. Cola-colored hair hangs to his eyes. He stands a sliver under 6 feet, just tall enough to peer over a fence. His fingers are slender but short. A stove burn shaped like a sickle marks the back of his left wrist. His skin is the color of apricot flesh. Freckles bloom lily pad-like under his eyes. His cheeks are as round and pitted as the rind of a cantaloupe. Acne marches across his shoulders like ants. Pimples prick his collarbone. There are some on his thighs, the small of his back, in the places he sweats where the sun doesn't dare shine. In the center of his body is a stomach, cushy and round, which he doesn't consider his own. It belongs to whoever's itching to see it. For laughs, he lifts his shirt on command. Other kids bury pencils and keys and half-eaten muffins into the flab. The red mark of a hand fades on his skin. For a long time, Dyson doesn't object. A week after his father died, on a hot, slurping Sunday morning in June, Dyson waited outside my front door wearing blue mesh shorts, a smidgen too short. His boxers peeked out of the bottom, and a long-sleeved t-shirt with the name of our high school printed across the front. A white headband flattened his hair to his forehead. I blew into my hands, swung my legs to warm up. I want you to show me how to do it, he said. You know how to run, I said, to show me how to have a body like yours. My body wasn't much of a body. I was flat-chested and tall. I felt all angles and elbows, a body inherited from my mother. My eyes rested unevenly on my face. My ears flapped out through drags of paint-straight hair that stretched past my shoulders. I hated my forearms for reasons I cannot explain. I hated my fingers for reasons I can explain. They were long and elegant, and men loved using this as an excuse to take hold of my fingers, to ask if I played piano. I didn't. My mouth was packed with bright, prominent teeth. I had a fawn-like porcelain beauty, the type that made older men eager and nervous. I never polished my nails. I wasn't perfect. I wore makeup only for the most funereal or joyous occasions. Though my skin wasn't perfect, compared to Dyson, and compared to the rest of our school, a parade of misfiring hormones. It glowed as if it had never been touched. I'd lucked into my mother's skin, olive-colored and flawless, no need to apply or rinse the way other people applied and avoided and rinsed. My mother modeled before I was born, not in the types of magazines people imagine when they hear the word model. She posed for Sears and J.C. Penney catalogs wearing matronly smocks patterned with cartoon irons and kittens and babies. She was forced out of the job after becoming pregnant with me. Her stunted career soured her on the beauty industrial complex, as she called it. She distrusted beauty the way people distrust politicians or exes. Whenever shampoo or makeup commercials came on TV, she would change the channel and scoff. Someday we'll look back on these poisons the way we do cigarettes and DDT. She considered herself one of those women who didn't care about looks. She intended to let herself age organically and gracefully to become whatever nature decided. However, she couldn't abstain from using beauty products. You buy the product to become the product, she would mutter, as she led me through cosmetic aisles, loading her basket with lipsticks and eyeliners and serums. She worked as a receptionist at a day spa, a job she hated but took, I suspect, to punish herself for never having made it as a model. The spa kept a shallow wicker bowl full of sample shampoos and cleansers and masks on her desk. At the start of each shift, she emptied the bowl in her purse. To protect our clients from poisons, she said, only to later transfer the samples to a bowl on our kitchen counter. Someday I'll grow a spine, she would tell me, as she plucked out packets of pricey bronzer and throw this trash in the trash. She was one of those rare people who were just as tragic as they believed themselves to be. Despite her best intentions and bitterness, she couldn't withstand the expectations imposed on her appearance. And in doing so, she taught me a valuable lesson in the inevitability of concession. The world encouraged me to see myself as an object of men's desires. And for years, I conceded. I shaped myself to the demands made on my body, kept it slender and pretty and fit, because I feared what would happen to me if I didn't. I'd heard stories about the women who didn't. When Dyson said, "Show me how to have a body like yours," what I heard was, "Show me how to internalize the expectations of magazines and commercials and lip-licking men in the streets. Show me how to obsess over myself, to hate myself, to see my body as something both valuable and worthless, something constantly under construction." That was, I believed, what he wanted from me. And regrettably, that's what I taught him. Okay, so I'm gonna run way into the future and read a sort of like a statement that speaks to things that happen much later on in the book. Our mission. The atmosphere began with a simple observation. Men are behaving badly. For thousands of years, men placed themselves at the center of society. Their chase for power, attention, and wealth resulted in massive global disasters. Something needed to happen. Men had to be better. What was needed was a community where men could challenge themselves to step out of the spotlight and into the background, to provide the atmosphere, like extras in a movie. At age 29, Dyson Lane left his promising career as a film and TV actor to team up with his lifelong friend, Sasha Marcus. Together, they started The Atmosphere, a supportive and secluded environment for men to learn strategies to undergo emotional, aesthetic, interpersonal, and professional transformation. Good things happen when men evolve. Good things for everyone. Dyson and Sasha started The Atmosphere on 15 acres of farmland in southern New Jersey. The first class of atmospherians were tested by food scarcity, man hordes, and tragedy. After the tragedy, however, Sasha refused to give up on their vision. And 5 years later, the atmospherian lifestyle is practiced officially in over 200 nations. Its training has helped resolve pervasive problems many men face, including hostility, envy, loneliness, philandering, catcalling, inconsiderateness, alcoholism, homelessness, sexual misconduct, sexual deviousness, sexual inadequacy, athletic nostalgia, unemployment, paranoia, misogyny, hoarding, dyspepsia, and political ambition. Since the Atmosphere's founding, such miraculous things have happened. Workplace sexual misconduct claims have declined by 87%. Male suicide rates have declined by 79%. Male unemployment has fallen to 1.8%. The man hoard epidemic has been eliminated. In our New Jersey headquarters, a revitalized 3-story shopping mall, atmospherians are taught to recognize and communicate emotions through proprietary psychological exercises. They receive job training in call centers, coding labs, and a carpentry warehouse, where members produce our renowned tiny house kits, available now on our website. Each atmospherian receives an individualized meal program developed personally by a company algorithm. We guarantee the most responsible and discreet treatment available. Past and current atmospherians include actors, firemen, senators, dictators, judges, presidents, athletes, doctors, sons, brothers, and dads. Nearly 97% of atmospherians choose to continue living in an on-site facility after completing the program. If you or a man in your life is struggling to keep up with our rapidly changing society, there is no treatment more effective, convenient, or safe. The Atmosphere, where men become human. Thank you.
That was so great, Alex.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, first, I just wanted to say thank you to Literati for hosting us, and thank you, Alex, for reading. I love both of those excerpts, and they touch upon some of the topics that I wanted to talk about today. So the atmospherians, it's it's so funny, it's so dark, and it's so troubling. I think as a reader, in your ability or in the book's ability to tear apart our society's toxic cultural mores, right? And it has such a unique premise, which I think that readers and viewers will get a glimpse of from your excerpts, right? This Sasha, a disgraced social media influencer, joins her childhood friend Dyson to create a cult called the Atmosphere, where men become human. So I just want to start with, tell me how you came up with this idea. What were the inspirations?
Yeah. You know, inspiration is so hard, right? Because like I feel like it's such a cloud of so many things that were happening at one time. I mean, I started this book in 2015. So right about that time was when I think there was the beginning of a real sort of reckoning with toxic masculinity. And that and what I mean by real there is that it seemed to become like the type of thing that people outside of the academy were thinking about, right? That year or the year before, Rebecca Solnit's Men Explain Things to Me came out.
Love that book.
Exactly. So like mansplaining was becoming like just a common phrase that a lot of people were using. So I was thinking about that. And really I was like thinking about like a lot of things, right? 2016 was also the beginning of Trump, and we saw two things happening at once. There was both the very real need for there to be like political resistance and like ethical resistance to a demagogue. But I think at the same time that opened up a lot of space for grifters. And whenever there was like a real need for a thing, America seems so invested in the opportunity to also have the sort of shortcut version of that same thing. And the internet seems like a really fascinating place where both of those things exist, right? You can find like the real thing, you can find like Nicole Hannah-Jones like tweeting at the same time as you find like some grifter out there promising to like tell you about like the true history of America, something like that. So they're all existing on this sort of same plane with each other. So that was really fascinating to me, is like how this like a real crisis allows for the possibility of both like real solutions and like I would say like sugar solutions or something like that, like something that just seems almost like saccharine in how it is like able to seem like, or meretricious, maybe that's the word, like just glitzy but like really empty. And so that was fueling a lot of like the I would say the sort of intellectual sort of ideas that were going along with this, but also like at the core of it, for years I've been writing about the relationship between these two characters, and I felt like I was really just looking for a narrative that would work for the two of them. I mean, I published a piece in Catapult in 2015, I think, that features both of these characters in a story that's told through Dyson's perspective. They're living very different lives than the ones that they live in the book, but like absolutely these characters were really important to me, and I was just looking for a way to for some sort of vehicle for them. And that sort of evolved into the almost like sort of surrealism, or like it was like two things happening at once. I had this sort of friendship story on one side, and I also had this sort of like my obsessions with what was happening in like a time of crisis in America, or a time of like exaggerated crisis, I guess.
Yeah. I'm curious about the surrealism, the kind of the lens of satire that you're using in humor, because this book is exploring a lot, which we'll talk about, the gender dynamics, the misogyny. And I'm curious, did you know that you were going to write a book that was kind of infused with satire and surrealism from the beginning, or did that evolve over time? Or why was it important for you to use that lens?
Yeah, I mean, I think it absolutely evolved over time. I mean, Crystal, you've written a novel, so you understand that like it's hard to fake a novel. Like
Mhm.
it's hard to like, you know, be like a fake person through a novel. And so I think like I just sort of see the world through like a satirical, sometimes pretty cynical lens, right? And that
Mhm.
I think shaped like that every day that I was sort of like working on this book. It couldn't be like, you know, I live like my I don't know, like 8 hours doing another thing, and then my like 6 hours working on this book every day, I would be like a totally different person. Like that just wouldn't be possible. So I think like there was an early stage in this book where it was like extremely serious. And that I think happens to me a lot. Like the course of revision is like letting the light in.
Mhm.
And like looking for ways to create levity, looking for ways to create like deeper emotional resonance. Because I think like in a first draft it can be like fairly serious and like the worst in the worst way possible, right? Like I said to a friend, the term I was thinking of was like smokestack serious, which I don't really know what that means, but it seems right, and that it's just like cloudy and dense,
Mhm.
and very like 1896 or something. Yeah, very coal powered, my early drafts.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so it was really interesting. And I think like over the course, I just sort of accepted like how I see the world,
Mhm.
to sort of have to involve itself in
That's
this book.
so interesting. So do you think that means that future books will also be written in this kind of satirical tone?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm working on a new novel now, and it seems like, yeah, I mean, it seems also like satirical, but also extremely different
Mm.
than this book. And I think what's been like really something I was like thinking about a lot, and like I talked to friends about this when I was, my hair is messing up, in like the final stages of the draft. I probably shouldn't say this if anyone is like intent on buying this book, but like there are like, but there are like flaws in this book, right? And maybe like Crystal, Crystal, you wrote a perfect book. We won't talk about.
No.
But like, but I think there was a certain point when I was like, you know, my edits were due in a month, and I was like,
Mhm.
I can either extend this deadline until I am the writer good enough to fix this book, or I can just be a lot better for my next book.
Mhm.
And that I think has been a really, really great experience because I'm not wasting
Mm.
time on the like smokestack seriousness.
Mhm.
You know, I'm
Mhm.
sort of like getting in and be like, you know, stop spending time doing things that I don't really want to be doing in a book, right? And just sort of write what most interests me. And they were like, you know, I feel like I can slightly sense a problem coming before it arrives, or like even when I like write something that I know won't last for a later draft, I just sort of like flag it and know that like it'll have to be changed, but I don't like
Mhm.
agonize over it in the same way, because I know that like so much will change over the course of writing a novel now, because I've seen that like literally happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing is as precious as it once was, because I can like,
Yes.
yeah, I've seen everything that ends up cut. I've seen everything like sort of shift around, you know, at the last second. So
Mhm.
so I feel much um I guess, I mean, these are like, you know, famous last words sort of thing, but like I don't feel like confident in this next book, but I feel like there are things that I know that I didn't know the first time.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I know how to write this book that I'm working on now. It just means that like the things that are like the general novel things, I feel better
Mhm.
prepared to deal with.
Yeah, and I think it's important what you said about following what interests you, right? And also, I don't think that for writers, I don't think their book is ever going to be good enough. You know, if you're just chasing that like perfect book,
Yeah.
that's you're just going to be writing the same book over and over again forever. So
Yeah.
there's at some point you need to let it go. And, you know, once it's published, I'm sure you are now experiencing, it takes on a life of its own. Readers have their own interpretations. You and I were talking earlier today about conspiracy theories for
Yeah.
this book. I
Yeah.
have one. Um, and it's just, yeah, it just takes on a life of its own, and then you need to start something else, right?
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
just writing is just hard that way. But instead of going into a general conversation about writing, I want to talk more about the atmospherians, and I specifically want to talk about how there's a lot of toxicity in this narrative world, right?
Yeah.
We have toxic masculinity, these toxic social media influencers and their desire for fame,
Yeah.
the toxicity of the wellness as a commodity and as this kind of like capitalist undertaking that's happening in our society now, disordered eating and body image issues. So that's a lot that you've put into this novel, and it works so well together. They seem like any one of those themes could be a book in and of itself, but you've kind of webbed them together, and I'm curious what draws you to these themes. And maybe you'll talk about one of them, maybe you want to talk about all of them, but I'm just really curious about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's also their hometown is something that I think Sasha describes it as like an issue with groundwater toxicity.
Yes.
And so I think that that's like a real, like, it's something that was like, that they were literally drinking in from, when they were children. Yeah, I mean, these questions of like toxicity, I mean, what interests me in it is, I mean, I've had my own, issues with some of these like toxic things, right? And so like I've written a lot about my history with eating disorders, so like that I think was definitely something that interested me, and thinking about how that sort of obsession replicates itself in other forms, right? Like this sort of toxic self-obsession that really drives an eating disorder, in which you think you're like the center of the world. You end up like almost, I've been thinking about the term surveillance a lot. I'm writing a piece about eating disorder literature right now, and this question of like surveillance has come up a lot for me, like how you end up like surveilling yourself constantly, and that I think seems to be like, in some ways, like eating disorders are like the original analytics, right? Because you're like constantly like focusing on like calorie counts and how you look, and as if you're like doing like a second by second metric. And I think that can be that resonates with the ways in which we sort of think about like the metrics of like being online, right? Like follower counts or activity. And so I think because it has been so clear to me through my recovery that, the ways in which I thought of my own body was so toxic that it seems almost easier for me to see how that toxicity sort of plays out in other ways, even when I'm like involved in it, right? Like, I mean, I'm clearly someone who, like I have a Twitter, I have an Instagram, like, so I like, I'm playing the game, but there's part of me that is still wary of it at the same time. So I try to sort of exist in both of those things at the same time, while I also sort of understand that like I don't think really good things come out of eating disorders, but some really good things can come out of like relationships with like friends online and stuff like that. Real sort of connections made. And I think that complication was also like, whenever I sort of like thought about the toxicity of this thing, like I also tried to think about like something is only toxic because you expect it to be pure. If that's like I don't know if that's like a tautology, but I think that like the friendship with like Cassandra seems toxic because Sasha thought that it was a real thing, right? And like what ended up getting in the way was like money or like fame or attention, right? And I think that seems to get in the way between Dyson and Sasha, but I think in the end, they find a way to try to like, there's something deeper with them versus like what Sasha has with Cassandra or Blake or anyone else. Yeah.
That's so interesting. And I think what you were saying about toxicity and surveillance is really interesting. I'm excited to read that essay. And I think that that the connection between those two, it's clear in the book as well, because the atmosphere, there's so much surveying of these terrible men, and there's so much surveillance in DAM or DAM.
Yeah.
DAM. So that's really interesting, this idea of disordered eating and that origin of always surveying yourself.
Yeah. I think like, I mean, surveillance is like, I think like was really fun about writing a book is realizing that you're only like writing about one thing. Like even when you're writing about like many things, like, I mean, there are the ways in which like, Sasha spies on men in the book, which very intentionally resonates with her watching bootleg movies in the beginning, right? And so the ways in which characters in this book are sort of at a remove of viewership, right? And a sense of, and so that was like really fun to sort of recognize how like these parallels were built in without me sort of realizing it. And that was like, it was as if I had like created all this terrain and I was just sort of like building bridges in like the last draft. Yeah.
That is so fun. I love when you're writing and your subconscious is doing all this work to create these layers. And then you can kind of marvel at what you've done later, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, who did that? Like, I have no idea. Yeah.
Because even the book is presented as a memoir by Sasha, right? So then there's also another level of remove there, which I think
and a
is
story
fun.
that she is clearly telling to someone else as well.
Right, which I love that at the end. Well, I'm curious about if there was any kind of research involved, and if it involved stalking influencers or reading about cults, or it just seems like it would be a fun book to research.
Yeah, no, it was super exciting to research. And like, I think I'm not a very good researcher, or like when I do begin to research, like I always go on like the wrong path. Like I get like obsessed with like a single detail. So like I mean, I read a lot of books for this. Like I read a bunch of novels about it, like Carl Kwan's The Incendiaries, Emma Klein's The Girls, Alexander Kleeman's You Two Can Have a Body Like Mine, like Ling Ma's Severance was also very much like talks about the resonance between sort of capitalism and cults, like all those, I think, which are really important for this. Other books that I didn't think would be that important became extremely important. Malcolm Harris's The Making of Millennials was extremely, it's called Kids These Days, The Making of Millennials. And that I think really helped me understand, I think, a lot of the like motivations for Sasha and Dyson. And it had me like, something that Harris talks a lot in that book is like with the collapse of like a stable middle class, like the corporation life. I've like joked with this to like sometimes my mom will be like, you know, if writing doesn't work out, you should just go get a job at a company. And I'm like, what company? Like what? Like I don't know where like the company factory is somewhere. But I think like with the loss of sort of that like middle class stability, what Harris sort of recognizes and what he sort of argues is that like for millennials that there are sort of three ways to make it. And that is through like extreme academic achievement, like extreme athletic achievement, or by like going viral. And I was really fascinated with the people who were like the middle managers of influencers, who are the people who like have like 8,000 followers, who like aren't making a living off of it, but every once in a while are like promoting like a really cool spoon that like that like they got for free, and like maybe like they're only like they're just surviving off like all the spoons that they've received in the mail. And like those people like really fascinated me, because like why do you keep doing it, right? Like what is it? What is this? And of course, like I think I talked to Lauren Euler a little bit about this as well, but like all of these are like metaphors for writers, right? Like, you know, I mean, what is like the 8,000 follower influencer if not like the mid list, right?
Yeah.
And so that was curious to me, because I could like think about those people of like, as soon as I'm like, why do they keep doing it? I was like immediately like, why am I still doing it? You know, like as I'm receiving my like ARCs in the mail, which is like the spoons of books, which are great. I love them. I see why they want their spoons, because I get it too. Yeah, exactly. So like that was really fun to sort of look into those people and to sort of like see what their worlds were like. And reading about cults, and like I also watched like all the cult documentaries, which are mostly like awful, you know, and I think follow a fairly. What I was really interested in is trying to. I'm about to say the worst sentence of all time. Disrupt the cult narrative. No, but like that wasn't like but I was thinking of like how to rethink sort of a cult narrative, right? And like in a lot of the novels that I was reading, there was normally the stories of like a sort of like ingenue sort of like woman who is sort of taken in by a charismatic leader in like a a place that already exists that seems great from the outside.
Right.
So I was really curious about like, what if the people, like, what if you sort of got the ground up from like those people sort of beginning it? Because I think even a lot of like cult documentaries are normally like, oh, like this is, you know, it seemed like a really great place to be for a long time. And I think reading a lot, like I read the Jim Jones biography, and I'm not coming out in support of Jim Jones, but like, Jim Jones was such a fascinating character. And I think like it was like Jim Jones and the People's Temple that like got, I think, Harvey Milk elected. Yeah, and they were like I could be totally wrong about that. So thankfully this is recorded and it was but they did a lot for progressive politics, and they were, but of course, like then Jim Jones ended up having like a messiah complex, and what was originally like the promotion of like a racial utopia became Jim Jones just like adopting a lot of non-white children and considering himself like higher than for doing these things, right? Which of course led to like sexual and systematic abuses, because like I think of course, as I've also been thinking, like to think of yourself like an expert or a good person, I think a lot of times like sets you up for either like at best a humbling, or like at worst it sort of really blocks you off from all of your own flaws, in the ways in which you sort of like might not be the person who you think you are. So like I was really curious about how these cults sometimes start in fairly, in ways that seem okay at the beginning, and then sort of devolve due to the like I don't know, the ego of their leaders. I was also interested as well, to like keep talking about this, is like what I've been thinking about is like the bad apple theory, which like Megan sort of very clearly applies to this early on in the book. And like one of my goals in this is like we have this bad apple theory, which I think is most prominent when we think about police violence, right? Whenever like a police officer kills often an unarmed Black person, or anyone, the line is like, oh, it was just one bad cop. As long as we like, you know, get rid of that one bad cop, like the problem is not policing, the problem is this single person. And Dyson uses that same logic when talking about cults. And so I was really curious about what happens when that logic is sort of brought to its extreme and like really is like reduced to its like absurdism, or rendered absurd, right? Because then when Dyson is like, you know, cults aren't a problem, like the problem is like bad cult leaders, right? And that's like the exact same sort of language of like, oh, it's like I've been listening to Empire of Pain, that the book about the Oxycontin epidemic.
Oh yeah.
And like the Sackler family's defense was like, it was just a few bad executives, you know, that it wasn't a system that was put in place in order to sort of make money off of this drug, right? And so that so I think oftentimes that's sort of brought out in a way to really hide systemic abuses. So I was curious about like how I could render that as, I think, empty as I believe that it is.
And kind of connected with that is this idea. So there's the bad apple theory. And then in this book, you have the men are categorized as atmosphere into these 12 groups, right? The stubborn man, the righteous man, the military man, the workaholic man, which is hilarious and, you know, absurd in that they're being categorized in this way, but they're also so very recognizable.
Right.
So I'm curious about how you came up with those categories.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is kind of a disappointing answer, but like that, I mean, like, honestly, I brainstormed that with a friend.
They're fun to read,
yeah,
you know?
Exactly. Like another writer, Willie Fitzgerald, and we sort of talked, I just sort of like sent him a text one day, like, what are the types of men, right? And I like sent him like the ones that I'd had so far, but also that section, and like, you know, we sort of went back and forth, and like eventually I like, you know, had to chisel it down into like my own ideas. But that section was also like important on like a craft level, because for like the longest time I was stuck with just this undifferentiated like mass of men, like these just 12 men who I like I'd given them all names, but that didn't really do much because like names are hard to really remember. And eventually I just needed some way to differentiate between them. And another friend who read the book compared it to like Ocean's 11, when like each person like has their job. And Ocean's 11 was probably a much more important text for me than I would like to admit. And
I love that movie. I also love like montages like that, when you can get a sense of the whole cast.
Absolutely, what everyone's doing, what they're all like. I watched Ocean's 12 recently too, also great.
Oh yes, okay.
Yeah. If anyone comes, if you don't buy my book, watch Ocean's 12. I needed that sort of section in order to just make the book work in a lot of ways. And I think that those are like, again, like moments that you just sort of really luck into, right? That it works both thematically, but also craft-wise. Like, and I think like when you get really fortunate is when like a really necessary craft thing becomes super important thematically, right? Because like, I think for the longest time, it was like every reader was like, sure, like a bunch of men, but like, who are they, right? And I'm not even sure that the characterization got any better. Like very little changed about like the characterization of these people. I just had their like little details, like the one character who just says like touchdown every time, like right, or the like army man saying like hoorah,
right?
And so like those like they're not defined in any way, and they're still sort of played for a joke, but I think they're differentiated, which I think once you like separate those men from the others, there are other characters like, you know, Jerry Simpatico that like stand out a little bit more. Because
and it's such a fun part of the novel to get a list of these 12 terrible men that are going to be coming to the atmosphere and getting that little bio. It's a really smart way to get the reader to distinguish between them, like you were saying. And it's just like it's like the montage of Ocean's 11. It's like a little fun intro.
Montages are the best parts of movies.
I love them. They're so fun.
Exactly. I also recently watched Dirty Dancing for the first time.
Oh my gosh, I haven't seen that since I was like a teen, but I loved it. Then, you know.
No, it's great.
I'm always wary of watching movies that I loved as a child because I'm worried that they're going to be terrible or offensive, you know.
They're going to be very not 2021. And I think Dirty Dancing mostly holds up.
Okay, good.
But I saw it like at an outdoor theater in Brooklyn, so I wasn't really like paying that much attention. I was just sort of like enjoying it. But
it's more about the vibe.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to pause here just to see if we have any Q&A questions. If not, I always have more questions, but I want to pause and give John a little time to talk.
No questions in the Q&A. Oh, I'm very bright for some reason. I think it's because it's about to storm here. So I'm suddenly not backlit anymore. We have no questions in the Q&A currently, but you can submit your questions using the Q&A feature that's available to you at the bottom of your screen. But Crystal, if you have more questions, I don't want to stop you.
I do have a question. So Alex, you were saying that you have been writing about Sasha and Dyson's friendship for a really long time. And I was curious, so the novel is told from the perspective of Sasha, and she's kind of telling her memoir. And I'm curious why you decided to use her, why she's the narrator, because she's the kind of the canceled influencer who agrees to join Dyson in creating this cult, right? So it's really Dyson's baby. So I'm curious, how did you decide to use Sasha as a narrator?
I mean, so many reasons. So many reasons that again, like, can't really be like articulated. But I think it's hard to have the most active character be your narrator, which like we've sort of known since like The Great Gatsby, right? Like we have, it's easier to sort of look at a person who is, doing more of like the bumbling, and so like it's nice to sort of have a bit of a remove from that. And I think Sasha's the one who has more of an arc too. Like to me, like Sasha's the one who has to like face off and sort of reckon with her own sort of issues in ways that like part of the point of Dyson is that he doesn't, right? Like that he sort of, you know, drives this, that he believes very much in the idea of redemption, but he doesn't really believe in it for himself. And so that's something that he wouldn't be able to see for himself, but it's something that Sasha can see for him, or that even if Sasha is not articulating that, it's something that because we're at a bit of a remove from him, we'll be able to see it. There are other reasons as well. This also comes up in the piece that I'm working on about eating disorders. Like I know very much from the beginning that Dyson was someone who would be sort of troubled by body dysmorphia and body image issues. And as I've been thinking a lot more about how to write about these questions, I've been really interested in work that creates a bit of a remove from them. I think for years, part of the problem, and so I would say like literally the danger of writing about eating disorders is that they're often told through the perspective of the person who has eating disorders. And that can be a really easy way to sort of trigger readers, right? And it's really difficult because I think it's a Joanna Novak has written really well about this for LitHub, and that like eating disorders are essentially an addiction, and they demand like routine and repetitions and doing the same thing over and over again, and that's kind of boring, right? And the moments of like narrative, if you're like creating a narrative, of the moments of conflict are the moments of like their most, I would say, triggering, right? When there are like moments of like restriction or purging or things like that. Those are the ones that can either like trigger someone who is in recovery, or also because sort of eating disorders are something that is oftentimes so based on modeling and looking towards other people for like how to do it, which is why there are sort of websites that are oftentimes like people who have the illness who are like almost just enabling each other. So I was thinking about how to write this book in a way that would not I would say even make the same mistakes that I did in some of my nonfiction. And so having a remove from Dyson was a way to talk about this issue and also show the ways in which it has an impact on the people in Dyson's life, which I think is something that isn't really written about as much. And I think that so that was really curious because it's something that like really pains Sasha, that she doesn't know how to help him, which is like it's hurtful for her. And I think focusing more on that I wanted to get a way to think about eating disorders outside of strictly the sufferer, which is how I've normally seen it done in the content, in the books and the movies and TV shows that I've watched. I'm sure there are people who are doing a really great job. I just haven't gotten to them yet.
Yeah, that's so true. I haven't thought about it, but yeah, it's often from the perspective of the person experiencing it. And I love that you are, you know, talking about how we're always kind of growing as writers, which we were talking about earlier, that the way that you wrote your nonfiction is influence the way that you wanted to write this.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's constantly that, like realizing, the mistakes that I made or like the successes that I made, like what things did I do well that I'm not doing well now that I can sort of like pull from. But I think absolutely the goal is to like constantly get better. And like, I love the Atmosphereans. I love it so much. You know, I had to love it, but I think it's also a fairly analytical book. And the book I'm working on now is a lot more emotional and heartfelt. And that's really exciting for me because it's like, I'm really like challenging myself to lean into the like emotional stakes. Whereas I think the Atmosphereans deals a lot with the intellectual stakes. And so, I mean, there are emotions in the book. But I think that's been like a really, really exciting challenge for me. And it's been really fun to write. So
that's exciting.
Writers like writing. Just what you see on Twitter.
But that's really exciting. I'm sure that all the people who are reading the Atmosphereans will be eagerly awaiting your next book. I think that's a good place to stop our conversation, I think.
Great.
Right? Thank you so much, Alex. It was a lot of fun. And thank you, John, for being our behind the scenes person with a very like wonderful, soothing voice. That
Yeah.
was like such a lovely intro.
Yeah, it's obvious why John has this job. Like,
Right?
yeah.
Yeah.
That's very flattering and appreciated. Thank you both for joining us this evening on At Home with Literati. We, of course, hope to have you in the actual bookstore soon, either for paperback of Atmospherians or your next novel. Both of you, your next novel. But until then, hope you continue to stay safe and be well. And to all of our viewers, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, if you're watching us live, there's a link in the chat to purchase the Atmospherians from Literati. And if you're watching us later on YouTube, there are links in the description below. And if you live in Ann Arbor, you can pop on in the store and pick up a copy as well. But we hope you continue to stay safe and be well. And we'll see you at the next event. So take care all. Have a great night.
Bye.
Night, everybody.